So one announcement that is very pertinent today to today's meeting is that we do have 2.4.0 available. And
I am I go by DB. I'm an engineer on the OpenSearch project. I'm going to talk about going from contributor to maintainer today. I did some stats, and there's a project called project tools in the OpenSearch project that I use to do this, so you can look at the stats yourself. But last week we've had 206 pull requests from 77 people. It's a number that varies quite a bit week over week, and we see sometimes 300, 400 pull requests, sometimes a few fewer. But it's a pretty healthy number, and in this year we've seen 8,200 pull requests. These are merged pull requests, so these are not just open pull requests. There's actually quite a bit more of open ones. They don't all get merged. Things get closed and so on. But there's a healthy number of people that are contributing to OpenSearch project, and since fork, there's 16,000 of these PRs from 639 people. I hope that we'll get to 1,000 sometime soon. These numbers are growing. I counted all the repos in OpenSearch project. I also counted some of the community projects, such as Obsters, Kubernetes operator, or the 3 repos in Ivan. There's some more in here. I think we consider those very much part of the of community, and look at them and are very happy to see those repos be actively maintained and contributed to. So how did these people, the hundreds of them, become contributors to the project? Well, they didn't go and schedule a meeting with someone or open some kind of product feature request. That's like a term we use at Amazon for feature requests from our customers. They didn't negotiate a date. They didn't really talk to anyone. They just signed up on GitHub, searched through issues, and maybe opened a new one, clicked the magical fork button, checked out the source code on their computer, and then partied on. They made a change, they tested the change, and they just made a pull request that got reviewed and merged. This, quite involved, but that's the GitHub contributor workflow that is used time and again in open source. It's well tested and is great. You don't need to ask anyone to do it. And then why did they even do this? Well, some people have jobs, like I have my job at Amazon, but there's also folks at Ivan, at Logsy.io, all these other companies. They're just trying to solve their customer problem, and that's why they became contributors. They may have been using OpenSearch and ran into a bug and decided to fix it, or just open an issue, and then somebody told them, hey, maybe you can write a unit test for this issue. They did. And then once they wrote a unit test, they were able to actually fix the bug. That's a nice way to do it. They were somewhere they're using OpenSearch, and that's why they decided to contribute. They could have been part of Hacktoberfest. That was a nice program. That's a global community of contributing to open source projects, and OpenSearch project has a ton of issues that are tagged Hacktoberfest, and a bunch of students from all over the world and non-students have contributed quite a few small and big things. So there's different ways that these people come to the project. But who merged all those PRs, those many hundreds of PRs? It wasn't me. I could tell you that much, because that's a lot of PRs, and I don't think it was David or it was Chris. Although I know they have merged some PRs there. It's actually maintainers. So if you look at the stats of how many maintainers, people who have maintain level access to OpenSearch projects, there is over 150 that work at Amazon today, but there's also 11 that don't. And these numbers are large for Amazonians for some historical reasons, actually, and maybe sort of originally by design, but they're changing nicely. So before May 2022, when an Amazonian joined a team that was working on OpenSearch project, they automatically became a maintainer. And that's just because when we forked the project, we created a sort of a team structure and parted on this code in a Amazon-like organized fashion. But we always wanted to change that. And then that's why there are so many maintainers that are Amazonians, is because so many people just automatically became maintainers. But since May, we changed that process, and it is now a public additional process. And actually, Amazonians go through the same process as everybody else. So when you join a team that is working on OpenSearch, where you get your salary paid for working on OpenSearch, you actually don't become a maintainer of anything automatically at all. So how do people become maintainers today? Well, one, it's those pull request examples. You have to contribute code or something to the project. There's plenty of projects that are very small contributions make you a maintainer, and some that very many contributions make you a maintainer. But the process is that you just get nominated by an existing maintainer. So it's a loop, it's self-referential, it's recursive. Existing maintainers will nominate a new maintainer, and they do this in private because we don't want to propose that someone be a maintainer in public and see them rejected, and then it hurts people that somebody wanted them to become a maintainer, but maybe other maintainers didn't agree. So this is something that happens over email in private. And existing maintainers vote. The vote is Apache-style voting, meaning that if you have a simple majority and nobody vetoed, then that maintainer is accepted. And then once the maintainers agree that someone should become a maintainer, they go to this person and say, hey, are you interested in being a maintainer here? And hopefully the answer is yes. And then the addition itself is public. So you see these pull requests that are saying, adding such and such as a maintainer, they went through this process. Note that there's no bar or condition of becoming a maintainer anywhere here. Different maintainer groups have their own maintainer policies. So some say, as long as you've contributed anything, we'd love for you to come and be a maintainer. And some say, we have so many maintainers, we'd rather have a smaller group of people do the actual maintainer work, and then maybe we want really meaty, significant contributions to the code base to become a maintainer. But this criteria is not specified at all in the projects. It's every group of maintainers decides for themselves. However, the process that we follow is documented, and we ask projects that live inside OpenSearch project to follow the maintainer process, such as private nomination and then public addition. And we just inherited most of this from Apache teams. So you can see some of the recent maintainers that were added. This one on the left is an Amazonian, and this one on the right is also an Amazonian added to OpenSearch project. You can see the significant volumes of contributions that these individuals have been doing in OpenSearch core, and we've nominated them as maintainer and added them. There is smaller repos with fewer, a little bit less activity with fewer things, where some new folks have been added. So it's why would one actually want to be a maintainer? It's actually a lot more work than you think. But the kinds of people that tend to want and to be maintainers, do a good job, are those who really want to invest the extra time to build a community and who care about the code quality. Note that you don't need to be a maintainer to contribute at all. The pull request workflow lets you contribute everything to the project. You don't really need maintain permissions. Others will code review your change anyway and will merge your PRs. So it's really, if you're willing to take on the additional work of being a maintainer, that should become a maintainer. It's not a badge of honor at all. It's just more work. And I maintain on a bunch of projects because I care about code quality and about the community that builds around it, and I want to help others do it. So that's why I do it, and I hope that you become maintainers for the same reasons. So the least favorite part of being a maintainer on projects is that I have to keep track of everything that's going on in those projects. So the way I do it is kind of insane. I create a label in my Gmail for every new project that I watch on GitHub, and I filter all the notifications into those labels. So by now, I have a lot of labels in my Gmail of the projects that I care about. And I am actually co-maintainer on a lot of these things. I even organize them in folders because I somehow happened to contribute to write a bunch of like Slack Ruby stuff. And now I own the Slack Ruby organization. Or MongoID at the point was something that I cared about a lot because my previous company used MongoDB and I love Ruby. And I ended up being co-maintainer of the entire MongoID org before we handed it back to MongoDB, the company, to cheerlead. So the number of these labels grows exponentially, and I go and read the ones that I care about. And this is how I'm in so many projects at the same time. I'm organized. But this is my least favorite part, is that I have to read a lot of notifications, emails, and care about so much of what others are doing. My most favorite part of being a maintainer is adding other maintainers, because then it's less work for me. And some folks here have been doing an incredible job in being maintainers of these projects. And I love when I can just walk away from a project that I feel is not sufficiently maintained because others have taken over and are doing an incredible job of maintaining these projects. That's kind of my mission in life, is to enable others to do this. So if you want to be a maintainer, there are a few steps that you can do. Number one, pick a project that you use. I don't really believe in trying to maintain projects that you don't really care about. I think you should have some skin in the game, or you should do it because you love you love the programming language. So OpenSearch Ruby is something I don't actually use, but I think Ruby is the best programming language. I mean, I think it is the best programming language in the world. It's therefore, I want to contribute to all Ruby projects on GitHub, period. So OpenSearch Ruby is a client, and you may be using it, and it's in a critical path of of how you use OpenSearch. So pick a project like that, pick an issue. I just found one in OpenSearch Ruby, number 61. It says add user guide. We've been adding these user guides to various clients and trying to systematize and standardize things across these clients so that when people try to use them, they find a good user guide. And we've been creating these user guide MD files. And the Ruby project has some examples in the README. I think they're correct, but I'm not 100% sure. It would be great if someone went and actually created the user guide, extracted the things from the README, added some more examples, made sure they all work, maybe even add a test framework and have those samples run part of our spec in this. That's a great first contribution. And I can tell you that if you contribute to user guide and maybe a few other things, the other maintainers on this project would love to have you co-maintain this project, because there's so much activity there, and there's just not a lot of people that are paying. There's a lot of people who come, make a change, and then they go. It would be great to have some people who stay and help others. And then you just do it. Just make a pull request and keep iterating and do it again. Repeat, rinse and repeat. There's other ways to becoming a maintainer. This one is a little bit bolder, but also it's less, I guess, visible. You may just want to create a project that you need with OpenSearch, and then you are automatically a maintainer because you've created it. You don't need any kind of permission. You can just go and do it. I recommend that if you work with OpenSearch, if you're creating an open source project, then inherit some of the templates we have in .github. You don't need to be part of the org, but they are really good. I think the code of conduct is very important, and you can just copy paste it. I think having docs like contributing and releasing with just basic common sense things is helpful to other contributors to the project. It helps create a welcome environment for them. Having a README, all those types of things. You can just copy the generic ones that we have in .github and then edit them to your project. And then just run with it. You are the maintainer. You can add other maintainers. You can police the project. You can help others use it, advertise it, come to this meeting and give a talk about it. That's the easiest way to be a maintainer, just create something new. Over the years, I've created some things that I'm really proud of, and I did very, very little work and made very few promises about those projects. I didn't say, oh, I plan to maintain those forever. In fact, I abandoned some of them myself, and others have taken over and made them massively successful. So, just do it. Don't make any promises and don't commit to anyone. It's not that big of an investment in some kind of future, you're not taking work in open source world for forever. You just have some action, create something, and then see what happens to it, and maybe you'll enjoy it, and maybe you'll want to be a maintainer on these projects for many, many years to come. Just run with it. That's it. These are all the suggestions I have to you for how to go from contributor to maintainer. I hope you come and join us, and then next time we talk, we can double, triple, quadruple the number of external maintainers on OpenSearch project across our now, I think, 70-something repos. It's growing quite rapidly. We'd love to see you there. Thank you. Happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, DB. Anyone have any questions or comments, or do we need to have a programming language war real quick?
There's no war, Chris. The Ruby is the best programming language.
Yeah, I'm not so sure about that, because DB is crazy, as everyone saw, given his email structure. You all saw that. That was on live. It's recorded.
He did call it insane. That's on the record.
Justifiably.
Court reporter, can you read that back?
No, this is awesome. Thanks for sharing, for sure.
Dance off.
I would happily lose that one.
Oh yeah. I've seen you dance. You dance like no one's looking. Awesome. Let's see. Did I lose my... Am I still sharing a screen?
No.
Oh, what have I done?
It's okay. If you want, I can just start sharing and we can start talking about the 2.4 release if we want.
Yeah, so presenter 2 today just happens to be David Tippett here, who's more than eager to start sharing his his stuff. We're going over the 2.4.0 release, which is very exciting.
Yeah. Let me
have at it, sir.
I will. Thank you. Just pulling up the chat on the side. Sad I can't see faces anymore, so I can't see y'all's reaction. I literally went and just copied this byline from DB seconds ago and added it to my slides because I think it looks nice. Regardless, you all probably maybe have heard from me. If you haven't, my name is David. I'm a developer advocate on the OpenSearch team working at AWS. And we just had our 2.4 release the other day, which is a really big release. I mean, we're talking slides and slides. So we're going to try and cover it at a really super high level. Get any feedback anyone has, questions, comments, testimonials, and we'll go from there. So I tried to break it down into a couple sections. The first of which is observability. So the big release on the observability front is the support for Prometheus metrics. So this allows you to pull from Prometheus. I'm not sure PromQL is supported right out of the gate. I think you have to use the PPL. But regardless, you should totally go check that out because that is a really big step from the dashboard side to get proper support for metrics. So you have one kind of pane of glass. Log patterns is super neat. It takes and generates kind of like a fingerprint for your logs based off of the punctuation in it. So these log patterns will look like, square brackets, comma, colon. And what that lets you do is it lets you very quickly look and say what volume of logs share this kind of common pattern. So you can like dive in on volumes. Maybe your logs all share the same pattern, in which case this is not going to be super relevant. But regardless, I think a lot of people have these different log patterns, and you can apply anomaly detectors to the things along those lines. So check that out and give us some feedback. Also, we have our security analytics plugin, which is experimental. The nice thing is out of the gate, it supports like 2,000 some different types of security rules, which are in a standard format whose name escapes me at the moment. But regardless, supports all different sorts of log types, Windows logs, NetFlows actually, and several other very common log patterns. So check out Security Analytics plugin. It is experimental. For those who don't know, experimental means we're not making any promises about the API being the same between versions. We can make breaking changes to those APIs on minor version changes because they're experimental till we yank that experimental tag. So, boy. So we have a bunch of new search features as well, all of which are experimental. This was a big experimental release. We have the neural search plugin, which allows you to get started more readily with semantic search. So that's going to be for anyone using like document or product search. That kind of goes alongside with the integrate your own ML model. So allowing you to import some natural language models. And there should be some examples coming out for that here shortly. Nate also asks, are we continuing the pattern of hiding experimental features behind configuration variables? And that is the case as far as I'm aware so far. I'm going to let either Charlotte or DB probably chime in on that one. But they should all be under feature flags that are configuration items. We have the search relevance plugin, search comparison tool, which allows you to run two searches side by side using different settings, so to speak. And you can compare, like, are the results more relevant with, say, neural search compared to BM25? I'd sure hope so. Otherwise, it would be, I'm not sure we would launch it. But it can help you with tuning your search and making sure you're getting the most relevant examples. Also, to OpenSearch, I'm going to call core, but OpenSearch the repo, we now have search back pressure, which allows nodes to reject requests if they're becoming overwhelmed so that we don't end up with crashed nodes. We've got point-in-time search, which is huge because that'll allow you to make a query. And as you're scrolling that query, you're going to have the exact same search for as long as the point in time is active. There's a lot of documentation there. Point in time is a pretty deep one, but I think it's going to do a lot of really cool things for anyone, again, in the product search space. Cluster manager task throttling. I can't speak to that one personally. Searchable snapshots as well. Cannot talk too much to that one. Haven't dove in too far on that, but that is experimental. I think from a high level, it just allows you to search your snapshots without having to have the whole index on disk. So again, weighted zonal search request, just another one of those ones for reliability. So you don't send it to a zone that's currently struggling with lots of trouble, we'll say. And then Windows deployment. We have files now for you to deploy to Windows, because I know there are a bunch of you out there that have Windows machines and servers, mandates from your organization to only ever use Windows. I'm so sorry. Linux is great, but we now support you. Additionally, we've got the ability to connect to multiple data sources. That is still experimental. But what that'll allow you to do is with OpenSearch dashboards, you can connect to multiple different OpenSearch clusters. Alongside that, we added multi-authentication support. So if those clusters use different authentication methods, you can now connect to all of them with your multiple authentication methods. We also have Windows deployment for dashboards. We released, I called this Geo, but I'm not sure this is actually a geographic feature because these XY point fields and XY shape fields are on a Cartesian plane. Oh, yeah. And I'm going to read Charlotte's comment off in just
thanks,
a second.
Charlotte.
Yeah, that is wonderful. So those point and shape fields are on a Cartesian plane instead of a normal, latitudinal, longitudinal graph, like around the Earth. And we also have GeoHex grid aggregations, which I am sure if you're working in the geospace, you know what those are. I do not. There's only so much one person can learn at a point in time. So, and finally, if you want to check out the release notes, they're chock full of information. They backlink to documentation if it's available. They backlink to notes, etc. There's a whole bunch in there. So I would really recommend checking out the release notes. And now I'm going to check over Charlotte's thing. One of the things that we realized with this release is we hadn't been consistent on how we're handling and exposing experimental features. So some of them are behind config and YAML, some of them are labeled in the UI. And if you're interested in the topic on how we should handle experimental features, there's a link there. So with that, wow, I've talked way too fast. There's a lot there. Anyone with questions or comments? I can go back to slides if you want.
I have a question about, hi, this is Amitai Stern from
Hi, Amitai.
Dogs.io. So I had a question regarding the searchable snapshots.
Yeah.
I was speaking to some of the folks working on the project, and I was wondering, does this mean there's a new, did they create a new type of node, a searcher node, or is this using the same data nodes? If someone knows about this.
So there, I actually did, I think, see that issue. I think there is the new search node type. As far as I'm aware, that is just a label. Someone might correct me on that, though, as to whether or not that is actually used to specify configuration.
Hey, this is Andrew Ross, developer on
hi, Andrew.
OpenSearch. Yeah, so there's a new node role. So if you have if you create a searchable snapshot index, then those shards will only be allocated to this new search node.
Awesome.
So it's not, it in effect, it ends up being just a label for those allocation purposes. So if you want to have dedicated compute capacity that's like only for doing this like remote searching, that's the purpose of the role. If you don't really care about that, you can just, what are all your data nodes, you can slap on the search role as well, and it will just be your, normal indexes, and these searchable snapshot indexes will just be co-located on the same nodes.
Awesome, thank you.
Actually, one quick question, Andrew. Do you know if by default that node label is applied out of the gate, or?
It is not. It is not by default.
Okay.
So it's I think for many, maybe most, I mean, this is something we can sort of sort out as well over time, but I think at least initially we want sort of the folks figuring out the cluster topology to be fairly intentional about this, because particularly as we add in like a caching layer and additional cache configuration it'll need on these remote nodes. I think for many sort of performance sensitive cases, you'll definitely want to have dedicated nodes for this, or at least you'll probably want to have some local nodes that are isolated from this as well. So there's no default here. You need to put this node role on the nodes that you want to be performing this function.
Would these nodes, like, would it make sense to put them in the cluster, or would it make sense to have like a separate cluster? Like
they still have to be in the cluster, right? Like it's the cluster managers still.
But wait, if I used remote cluster, if I used remote data nodes, like, wouldn't that work? Sorry, I'm getting the term probably wrong.
So the node role is just called search. We'll likely use this for additional features in the future as well, but they still have to be part of the cluster, because it is the cluster manager that kind of assigns who does what, and so they all have to be kind of part of that cluster and communicating with the cluster manager and there to receive the assignment. To it still does sort of the a shard allocation. It's more virtual now, but it's like nodes get provisioned ahead of time of like, okay, you are responsible for this remote shard of the searchable snapshot. All search requests for that are going to come to you, and so that sort of assignment happens a priori, just like in the normal case. Like we haven't touched any of that functionality. It's more or less the same. So it has to be part of the It has to be part of the cluster in that it's talking to the cluster manager, right?
That makes a lot of sense. In a lot of one of the bottlenecks we have, like when I'm trying to maintain clusters, there's several bottlenecks, right? CPU, disk space. One of them is just number of shards, right, per node, like how it's distributed. It's basically also number of shards in the cluster in total. If the manager, cluster manager is it like we've seen cases where cluster manager could be overloaded because of the number of shards in the cluster? Would this, I mean, is it keeping the number of shards also remotely in its memory?
No, we haven't. So that the cluster manager bottleneck is not changed here. If that's a bottleneck for you, that's kind of a different problem we'd have to tackle. But the behavior of it now is like, from the cluster manager perspective, a shard is kind of just a piece of metadata that it assigns to another node to go do work, right? And so that part of it is unchanged.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome.
If I might sound like a broken record for a second, there's no better replacement than going and pulling 2.4, installing it, and playing around. I have yet to do that, embarrassingly enough, but I do consider that part of my responsibility. And it helps, even just looking for the new buttons and clicking things and breaking things. That's just how I roll. Any other questions for Mr. Tippett here or any of the developers online? Thank you for joining us, by the way. I appreciate that very much. It's an awkward situation when I can't answer questions. Go ahead.
I do have another question regarding search back pressure, which is an awesome feature. We've been seeing a lot of cases where evil search, we call them killer searches, where it just kills the cluster. Someone decides to send massive, leading wildcard regex on huge amounts of data, and just all the nodes go up to 100 CPU and pretty much everything's blocked. So in search back pressure, we've seen this case where someone will send a really heavy search. It could be it's a needle in a haystack finding which one it is. And then all the other searches kind of get queued up behind it. So is search back pressure handling the surge of searches coming, or is it handling that specific one search that causes the mess?
I'm just going to see if Charlotte is still on and could answer that question. That's a really good question, though.
Yes, if I'm just so I understand the question right, if a node is processing a search that sends it up to 100% CPU, will that search back pressure prevent the smaller searches from occurring, or will it pause the big one that's causing all of the hiccup?
Yeah, more or less. Like, are we going to is the back pressure relevant to the heavier search, or is it relevant to the search queue that follows it?
So I'd recommend going back and checking. There is an RFC open for that. If I remember correctly, I think it is just for that individual search. I think it will take that individual search, recognize that, hey, this search is killing this node, so we're not going to go and let it start, roaming around, so to speak. And would probably push back on just that one search request, but I'd need to double check on that.
Yeah, I saw Charlotte unmute for just a split second, not to put you on the spot there.
No, it's fine. I did unmute, but my answer wasn't going to be any more satisfying. That I have to double check on it as well. But yeah. I'll circle back with you, Amitai.
Great, thanks, Charlotte.
Yeah. Actually, Amitai, a question to you. You'd mentioned the issue with the coordinators not being able to maintain with the number of shards. Do you have an open issue for that?
You mean the cluster manager?
Sorry, yeah, cluster manager. Yeah.
It's kind of an odd situation because you can make the cluster manager bigger, right? Like the instance,
Right.
you could beef it up and then you're probably going to be fine. And I don't know if many folks have tried this, but it's really hard to sort of understand what the actual number of shards per node is, the one that really is blocking you. It's sometimes it could be 1,000. Sometimes we could reach nearly 2,000. Everything's fine. And sometimes 500 is really bad. It depends on the data and the way the cluster is being used. But in general, it's recommended in many documentation, in a lot of the documentation, not to have too many shards in the cluster. But I have not seen a ticket open on it. I don't know if it's like a symptom or the actual issue.
Well, that's interesting. I think we should dive into that though at some point, because that's that level of instability and like not knowing what that threshold is, and if you've reached it, like you said, not knowing is 1,000 going to be fine on this node type. That's a real a challenge, and it sounds like something that just takes a bit of experience.
Looks like DB just dropped some science in the chat there that might
Yep.
clarify a few things.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. It looks like actually, per DB's comment, it doesn't look specific to a specific query. It looks like it just tracks memory and CPU usage and then rejects running or starts canceling running searches when the threshold's breached.
Awesome. Thanks, DB. It sounds kind of like a circuit breaker per search. I mean, it kind of sounds like that. And regarding the roles, what I was asking is like, would it be better to, we'll test this out, of course, but I was thinking of an architecture where I have several clusters. I don't need many searcher nodes, and I would like to scale them down, like when I don't need them.
Yeah.
So in a region, it would make sense maybe to have a remote cluster serving the searcher nodes for old retention, have it scaled all the way down and only scale up for the entire region rather than have, say, 2 nodes per cluster. I'm just trying to think how out of the box, trying to save on instances being up for no reason.
Yeah, there's a lot of good things we can discuss there. So we have 2 themes here. On back pressure, very quickly, the RFC is pretty thoroughly explaining what the limitations of circuit breakers are. So these do act like circuit breakers, except they're at a different level. They're at the search query level. So it's much more fair and fine-grained. It's an improvement that has been tested in all kinds of workloads and production in the AWS managed service. So they've kind of worked backwards from the majority of the problems that we're seeing in that service. So I have high confidence that these things work. But the end goal of all of this is probably a framework that can run a query plan and evaluate what the cost of that query is going to be and start allocating, not just reacting to overly high CPU usage and high memory usage, but also allocate fairly based on the query plan. That's not work that has been done, but that's the kind of the end goal, I think, of a lot of this work. It will meet it in the middle somewhere between back pressure and query planning. For the other one, you've mentioned a lot of problems that we know about and that we've heard about. I think it's a great place to start to bring your own narrow one that you've experienced into a GitHub issue. And then we should connect it to either some work that's already being done by other people or maybe create some work for ourselves around that. Generally, the cluster manager is a huge bottleneck in large deployments. We'd like to get rid of it. Not sure how though. So no, if you want to delete.
You mean no cluster manager, kind of like a Kafka-esque kind of situation?
I mean, that sounds ideal, but what are the underwater mines in deleting cluster? I tried to delete cluster manager and nothing worked. So I think it's not that simple.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like it would work very well. Search back pressure is really interesting to us. I mean, one of the pitfalls that I could see, I mean, we're gonna have to test it. The idea is that it's like, yeah, Kafka-esque is definitely, you know, studying Kafka myself, it's different. It's weird in IT. So search back pressure is like, there's an issue there where I could have, let's say a customer would set up an alert or a rule. Rules are very similar to alerts in Logzo, and it's basically a timed query, right? And their query could be very reasonable when they set it up. But then like search back pressure may start kicking in because they start sending data that their query, I mean, if you query basically no data, it's a very quick query. It does create pressure on the cluster. We've measured that even querying a cluster that has barely any data will cause pressure. But if you add data that's like huge documents and you have a regex in there, suddenly your query will probably cause the search back pressure to kick in, right? Well, so it's like, it's not the query's fault, it's the data now.
Yeah, that's exactly why search back pressure exists, is to avoid that. Meaning that it should only kick in when you are going to exceed the thresholds that are reasonable to execute. Meaning that if you're going to kill a node by doing this kind of query, then maybe that query should fail before it brings the node down.
Yeah. Yeah, but when you want to plan the query, then it's like you have to know the data in order to plan the query. It's very hard. Thinking forward on what you were saying earlier on creating a query plan.
That's why they did search back pressure before they did query planning, because that's a much easier thing to grok. You set the limit and you say like 90% RAM and heap usage. Planning does imply knowing whether you're going to do a full data scan, whether it's going to be distributed, collecting all the data. But databases do it quite well today, like SQL Server. And in theory, we should be able to do it at least well like that, but it's not an easy problem. But wouldn't it be?
Thanks.
So knowing how much the query will take allows you to load balance all these things in a much smarter way.
I think that separating search from indexing is probably like segment replication brings us so close to that it would probably be the you know, the next step, because I think that, you know, the queries, they kind of like half the pressure on the cluster, half and half indexing, half queries in many cases. So it seems like even just separating it may be a good middle solution in between search back pressure and the planning.
Yeah, Andrew, you've with the remote snapshot search, do you think it's doable to make a cluster that where search nodes are truly separate from indexing nodes, and what are the trade-offs?
So with what's like available in 2.4, I don't think it's practical, but like we are, I mean, the reason that we're building searchable snapshots is not necessarily because the searchable snapshot feature is like kind of the end all be all. It's really the incremental building step to what Amitai is talking about. So we're adding kind of the technical pieces to get there. Absolutely. It's not quite ready to wire everything up yet with and then even the searchable snapshot piece is really about and coupled with the other feature that's still in process and was initially released in 2.3, the remote backed index, where you're sort of continually updating your index or continually sort of syncing your Lucene segments to the remote storage. We can couple those together and get kind of that split architecture. Like we're definitely working towards that. And then even with segment replication without having any remote storage at all, there's the possibility of sort of just changing which node does what, and then you could get those isolated indexers in search. But it's not quite possible now without getting there and hacking stuff up. But yes, we are working towards that for sure.
Do you have a release in mind where this will become possible?
I don't have a specific release targeted just yet. No, we're working on getting all that planned and figuring out where that's going to be.
Cool. Amita, you're making pull requests, right?
I will start making a bunch of pull requests, and based on the first part of the talk, we'll work towards that as well.
I really do
definitely dig in and like open those issues with the specific, like you have some very specific complaints, right? And like your bottlenecks and the experiences and all of those, like getting that on, as part of the discussion is definitely super helpful.
Thanks.
It feels like you're almost building a house, no matter how smart your appliances are, you got to have the fuse box there first, so you don't blow everything up.
Just look at the chat thing, and Alejandro, I mean, cross-cluster search, that was what I was trying to say earlier with regards to the, I was also asking, that's what I meant regarding the searcher nodes, having cross-cluster search with like a searcher node cluster and all the rest like without them. Sorry for hijacking your question. Anyway, thanks for everybody who answered.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't have a great answer with how that can play with cross-cluster search, but like specifically searchable snapshots leveraged with cross-cluster search. I'm not sure how those two would work together, but like I get your point about like you want to have you're talking about like something that would be could be considered sort of like fairly cold storage in that you don't need a lot of requests, but you want to be able to search things on demand. And so you don't want to provision a lot of compute capacity for it, but you want to have some there, right? And it definitely makes sense.
Yeah. And I didn't want to hijack the other questions. So Alejandro had a totally different question, which I think merits its own space. Sorry. He's asking the difference between multiple data sources and cross-cluster search.
I think I can take that one. So multiple data sources allows you to have multiple different and very distinct separate clusters. So these clusters are clusters that don't talk to each other, but you would be able to query them with the same instance of dashboards. So before you were kind of tied in a one-to-one relationship, you spun up a dashboards instance, you spun up an OpenSearch cluster, and they were tethered together. This kind of decouples that and allows you to run multiple OpenSearch instances, which maybe someone will do for, compliance reasons. Maybe they have different auditing requirements as far as like where the data is physically located. So that's an example of why someone would use that multiple data sources versus a cross-cluster search, where the cross-cluster search, it's genuinely kind of all works as the same cluster, we'll say. Good question.
I think it's also a prelude to being able to add different things. Like this is something I wanted for a while, maybe the ability to add like a SQL database as a lookup for my data, because a lot of my data just contains, let's say, I don't know, some user ID, which is not human readable. Yeah. You create a dashboard, you want to send it to an executive and show them something that they can read. If they are looking at a bunch of numbers, like IDs, it doesn't really tell them much, but if you could use a lookup of an existing database and, change those IDs into something that you don't have, there are lookups today in OpenSearch dashboards. You have to statically put them in. It's not as comfortable as having it hooked up.
Yeah. The follow-up question was asked, is this going to allow non-compatible Elasticsearch, OpenSearch data sources? I couldn't say specifically. If someone wants to contribute that and it's compatible, then I don't see why not. But yeah, it's a good question. It's up to the community, really. But yeah, I think it was Amitai's point, I think it's actually enabling Prometheus as well to be visualized on dashboards, but oh, we are just about at time. So I'm going to hand back over to Nate for closing, but we'll hang around after we close. And if anyone has any other questions.
Awesome. Yeah, I was going to let that conversation go on as long as I could. I have nothing else for the good of the order. If anyone else does, you're welcome to share it, but I'm going to go ahead and scroll to see you next time.